Hello everybody, hope you can hear me okay. I think you can. Good morning. Well, it's morning for me. I'm not quite sure where people are in the world. Just a few little things to start with. If you have come through the website, so if you're sitting in the website on this live stream here, which doesn't seem to be saying it's streaming for some reason, or you have to play first. Please click on here where it says YouTube to take you to YouTube first. So you watch it on YouTube. The reason for me asking you to do that is because then you'll have access to this chat window where you can ask questions. So this is where you can ask questions. It would be nice if people could just jot down what part of the country or the world they're from. That would be nice, but you don't have to do that. Let's just get rid of this. So the format of this is going to be 20 to 30 minutes of me talking about stuff, and then hopefully answering all your questions if people have questions. I much prefer to spend time answering people's questions than talking. That's kind of the main thing here. So you can ask questions about the self-study or just general EA questions. So yeah, enter into that chat window any questions as you go. So to start off, let's just give you a sort of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So essentially there's kind of two sections to this. First of all, you'll have met Mason Magma if you're doing self-study. It's right at the beginning of the first module. So I'm just going to quickly run over those, but the reason for it quickly introducing those is for people that haven't met them, because then I'm going to go and explain why Mason Magma exist and how those things two came to be and what the implications are. The second half is going to be talking about the Enterprise Transformation Maturity Canvas, the ETMC, which is also introduced in Module 1, and why that's important. So if we just start here. So just quickly to recap what Mace and Magma are. So Mace and Magma are, and if you want to see my pretty face, I'll add myself there. Don't I look pretty? So Mace and Magma are fundamental ontologies to allow us to consider different pieces of information. Mace is a structural ontology, i.e. deals with the structure of something. And it consists of methods, artifacts, culture, and environment. Methods are, so this is used for categorizing information about the structure of something, the structure of a business, the structure of a part of a business, the structure of some capability. Consists of essentially, in the middle are artifacts. These are the things that the methods produce and consume. So these are essentially the inputs and the outputs. The methods are the thing that convert the inputs into outputs, and the methods are executed within a cultural and an environmental or technical environment that executes the methods. If people are executing the methods, then we're talking about the cultural context of the methods. If IT or other technology is being used to execute the methods, then that information would be contained within the environment section. Gamma, or Magma, used to be called Gamma, is also a high-level ontology, but now we're looking at transformational information. So we're not looking at the information that defines the structure of something, which is fundamentally what architecture is about. We're looking at information about transforming or changing things. So fundamentally we have the motivation as to why are we changing things, so that answers the why question, the kind of the requirements, if you will. The actions are the things that we are going to do in order to do whatever transformation we're doing. Guidance are things that are guiding our actions, so things like principles, policies, standards, guidelines, those sorts of things. Measures is how we are measuring our success or how we're measuring our maturity, and assessment is what is our assessment against those measures. So just a brief introduction to MACE and MAGMA. From a MACE point of view, there are various current ways like POLDAT, process, organization, location, data, applications, and technology, PPS, people, process, or PPT, people, process, and technology. But the big thing about those is they're missing culture, which of course is a hugely important thing. So to be missing the most important thing in those kinds of groupings is probably not a good idea. So I just wanted to go through kind of where my thinking, the story of my thinking as to how did I arrive at MACE and MAGMA. Why did I think I needed MACE and MAGMA? So going back in time, maybe 10 years, maybe even 15 years, when I started in enterprise architecture, I noticed that most people would be talking about structural information. So depending on what tool or what framework or whatever you are looking at, people might use different words, but essentially the things that they were defining in these structures were about that defined the structure of a particular thing. In addition to that, people also, there was a kind of some kind of a tacit agreement or understanding that this information could exist at different levels of abstraction. So we have the operational information, so that's kind of the information you would put in a CMDB, although a CMDB is only technical and we're talking technical and business here. Then we could have a physical model of that information. We could have a logical model of that information. We might even have conceptual and contextual models of that information. So different ways of looking at the same information, where the information's been abstracted the further up we go. So that was kind of the general thought about things. As time progressed though, people started saying, well, the structure, that's all very well and good, but what's driving the structure? That's got to be driven from somewhere. We don't just invent this, right? For our target, of course, you can document what the current is, but how do we figure out what the structure is, what's driving us? And people started saying, of course, yeah, well, there's this strategy information that's kind of higher up, that's, that needs to happen before we get to the structural information. So when that happened, these various frameworks and tools, etc., added those things also. Some frameworks, like the business motivation model, only documented that information, actually. So the reason people added this was so they could start tying this structure back up to a strategy to answer the why question. Oh, why have we got these customers documented down here? Oh, because of this strategy work. Our strategy is to gain those type of customers. Why do we not have certain customers down here? Because the strategy is not to engage those customers, that kind of thing. So there's this feeling that, okay, we start with strategy, someone does that work, and then eventually we'll come down and do some structural work. Then other people started saying, well, hang on a minute, you can't just go straight from strategy to structure. We've got to plan things. There's got to be some kind of planning in the middle here. And therefore a kind of an execution kind of grouping of information came up. Things like programs and projects, work packages, those kinds of words, to bridge this kind of strategy to structure gap. So then people could say, yeah, okay, so we have the strategy, then that drives what projects we have, and then the projects modify the structure. So it was a kind of the intimation was, this is how you do stuff. You do strategy, then you do execute, then you do this, and then you do this. You end up doing this. EBMM actually is a framework from a guy called Nick Malik from Microsoft, who identified that these things were fragmented and what you needed were all of these things in a one meta model. So he developed a meta model called the Enhanced Business Motivation Model. think that's what the E stands for, where he took the business motivation model and then added some things to it, but I won't go into the detail, but also that's not complete. So I looked at this and I kind of started thinking, well, so we've got this structural information down here that can kind of operate at different levels of abstraction, and then we've got this information here. It's not structural information, is it? It's information about why and how do we do things. It's more kind of transformational information. But that people don't talk in terms of different levels of abstraction when they think about this information. So this is kind of what seemed to be intimated by everyone that spoke about this information. There was a sort of implied this structure that was maybe at conceptual, logical, physical, operational kind of levels. But before you did this work, you do this work, the strategy and execution. So that was kind of intimated to be at the contextual and conceptual level, which is a little bit like what Zachman does, actually, intimates that. Well, it kind of specifies that, actually. The further up you go in the Zachman model, the more strategy kind of stuff you see, and the further you go down, the more structural stuff you see. But then I said, well, hang on a minute, that's why should that be? That doesn't kind of make sense. And because I then started to recognize that this strategy and execution work, this is transformational information. So there might be different words up here to different words down here. So maybe we have let's say tactics, strategies and tactics here. They talk about what are we going to do, how are we going to change. Well, we have these strategies and we have these tactics. Down here we don't talk in strategy of tactics, we talk in terms of plans, but again they're just descriptions of how we're going to change. So that's where these things came from. Then I suddenly realized that, well, actually, if structural information exists at different levels of abstraction, and we kind of have to start, because things are too complex, thinking at higher levels of abstraction so we can get to the lower levels of abstraction, which is what we need in order to change the physical world, then actually the transformational information should also exist at these different levels of abstraction also. And while the information that relates to structures might differ at different levels, fundamentally what exists at each of those levels are the same. And that's where MACE came from. So at all levels of abstraction we have MACE, and similarly at all levels of abstraction we have MAGMA for transformational information. So I just wanted to run through, the thinking behind MACE and MAGMA. They just weren't just invented out of thin air. They came about through my thinking about these kinds of things. Some people have said that, did I create MACE and MAGMA just so I could create something new, so I didn't use PPS or POLDAT? And the answer is no, I didn't just create them just for no reason. This is the reason behind that. So moving on to the ETMC information, let's just see if there are any comments at the moment. I don't think there are. Hang on a second, sorry to... Okay, I see Pete there from Brisbane, Australia. That's a very bad accent, sorry about that, Pete. So moving on to the ETMC then. Let me just minimize this window because it's delayed and distracting. So here we are in the adoption part of POET, and we're talking about the measures. So how are we measuring our adoption? Now, POET, and indeed PEAF, it has even more detail, but POET contains various spreadsheets to allow people to, or allow organisations, enterprises to try and figure out maybe how mature they are. Now, I won't go through the whole maturity thing, but most maturity models tell you how to measure your effectiveness at doing methods, because they tend to be process capability frameworks. CMMI and all those sorts of things. But because we have MACE, we are not only concerned in your maturity of the methods that you use, but also the maturity of the artifacts that are being produced and consumed, and the culture that we are using, and the technical environment. The reason being, of course, is you could be fantastically mature in your methods, but if the artifacts you're creating are bad formats, bad content, then obviously that's not going to create very good results. And of course, culture can trump everything. So there are lots of detailed spreadsheets, but to start off for an organization, you kind of, in order to use those spreadsheets, first of all, you need to have learned a bit about, or a reasonable amount about POET and PEAF. And then it could be maybe a bit laborious and, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? Time consuming to fill it in. So as an initial evaluation, we use something called the Enterprise Transformation Maturity Canvas, or ETMC for short. So ETMC builds on things, the simple things that are contained within POET. So the first thing it says is, let's lay out the phases. So we have strategizing, roadmap, initiating, elaborating, constructing, and transitioning, which transition generally into operations and support. So this is where work is done, and the grey, I'm not sure if you can see it on the video here, but in very light grey, just kind of to give people an idea of what's going on in these things. These are the disciplines, our transformational disciplines. So project change, configuration management, requirements management, analysis and design, modelling, discovery, building, testing, and governance. So governance down to the next level, and lobbying up from the level below. So of course, as you will have maybe already learnt in POET, if you looked at disciplines, the disciplines are the same. It's just the information we're performing those disciplines on changes. This is one of the things that hangs the whole of POET together and keeps it kind of coherent. Of course, between each of those phases, there's the information, which are these more rectangular boxes. So information about the enterprise's context is used as input, and the strategizing work produces output at the contextual level, which is taken as an input for the people working in road mapping to produce the information they produce, which we deem to be conceptual information. Then we go into projects. Forget this grey box here, that's just there for systemic information. It's not part of this thread, which is why it's not got a number on it. Then we go into project execution, where they take what was created by this conceptual level and create logical information. Then the elaboration work takes the logical information, creates the physical, constructing creates the operational, transitioning creates the pushes the operational into the physical world. So that is an overall way of looking at your entire transformation domain. And the reason I ask organizations to start here is it's easy to get a flavor, which I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but also instead of starting at the EA level, you're starting at the bigger level, and it's always better to start at the bigger level. The reason it's better to start at the bigger level, i.e. the whole of the transformation domain, is because the stakeholders in your organization don't care about all of this stuff. They don't care about any of this. What they care about is they have a strategy, and they care that the physical world needs to change so they can satisfy their strategy. All of this they don't care about. So we want to make sure that the end-to-end is working. And what often happens when I get engaged by companies to look at their enterprise architecture, I tell them, well, if this is at your enterprise architecture level, and let's say road mapping is the core of it, which it is, if you're feeding road mapping with rubbish information, it doesn't matter how good I make your EA work, it's going to produce rubbish. Consequently, if your solution architecture work, or the initial project work that's supposed to take my output, if that's rubbish, it doesn't matter how good my output is, that's going to produce rubbish. So you need to consider the whole and consider which parts of the whole you may want to mature. That may be this core EA area, that may intimate that you need to change this area as well. So that's kind of the definition of it. The way to use it is what we do, or companies can engage us to do this, or they can do it themselves, is to basically go and have some meetings with groups of people that work in different parts of this stack. So go and have some meetings with people who work in this strategizing domain. Go and have meetings with people who work in the EA kind of road mapping domain, although the whole of this is EA really. Go and talk about to your solution architects, business analysts, coders, testers, configuration managers, project managers, etc, etc, etc. And the reason for that is the best way of evaluating your transformation capability is to ask the people that work in your transformation capability, because the people on the front lines, they're the people that are going to know they're the people that are going to know and understand perhaps what is good and bad about your transformation domain. When we utilize this, what we first do is ask people to write on a yellow sticker what their name is and stick it in the areas they think they work, and then ask them to comment on other areas. Now that doesn't mean to say if you're a solution architect, so you work down here, you're restricted to putting stickers in here and in here, because this is where you work and this is the information that you produce. What is more useful is people who work in a particular area, what is their view on the other areas? And what usually happens is whatever area someone works in, people potentially have a lot to say about the information that they're fed and the work going on in previous phases. So I'll come back to that in a second. So in terms of an assessment, if you use the detailed spreadsheets that I was talking about which utilize MACE, these are all the categories. This is an example of an assessment that's been done. So there's red, yellow and green that people have chosen. Out of that, the spreadsheet will also generate a little pie chart and some kind of an idea. So whenever you do this kind of maturity assessment, just doing one is not really, well, it tells you something obviously, but what's more important is to do that this year, but then do it next year and see how the numbers have changed. Are things getting better? Are things staying the same, or are things getting worse? But we're not really talking about these detailed spreadsheets. So if we come back to the ETMC, this is an example of an assessment that's been done and been completed. So as you see, you'll see yellow stickies here. Not sure whether you can see the words, but some of these, like this one here says Mark, this one here says Raj, this says Philip. So these are people who have put their names on the phases that they perform their work in. We then ask people to put a red post-it note if someone believes there's something that's not good in that area. So this is what's wrong with the methods or the culture that is being used to perform this work. The square boxes are the artifacts, so what's good or bad about the artifacts or the environment that we're using to create the artifacts, the tools that we're using. So put a green sticker if you think something's good, put a red sticker if you think something's bad, put an orange sticker if you think something could be improved. And actually an orange sticker is a red sticker kind of in disguise. It's a more positive way of looking at red stickers. So you might find there's a lot of orange stickers that match red stickers. It's just talking about the same problem. One is talking about defining the problem, one is talking about a solution to the problem. So when you do something like this, you then start immediately visually to get an idea of what's good and what's bad in your transformation domain. Now obviously, if things are bad at the front end of your transformation domain, like any kind of pipeline of work, mistakes made at the front are going to cost you hugely the further down this stack you get before you realize something was wrong. So bearing in mind there's a lot of red stickers here, you know, this particular organization, this is a real organization that was that used the ETMC. Obviously there's some serious problems in this whole enterprise architecture area, which is in fact what they brought me to mature, but they were looking more at this road mapping area until I pointed out that, well, hang on a minute, there's all of this bad stuff going here. If we turn all of this green and you still got this red, what's the point? Similarly, they didn't really have a lot of solution architecture going on, which is why you've got a lot of red over here. Similarly, I said, well, we can improve this and make this all green, but what's the point if all this is red? You're still going to get rubbish coming out of the bottom. So the scope of the work was expanded to look at this work, maturing this part, as well as this part, as well as the solution architecture part. So there's two ways you can actually do this. One is using a cloud application as an example of what you've just seen, or you can kind of do it face to face. It really depends on you. There are benefits to both. This is very, very tactile, and things like this could be put down a corridor in your offices, so everybody working in transformation can see it, discuss it over a period of time, rather than just having 1 or 2 meetings to, you know, kind of do this kind of stuff. The cloud application is good is because you, obviously if you have people working in remote locations, half your team's in, you know, Rayleigh and your other team's in LA or Birmingham or wherever, you can still collaborate at the same time and have joint meetings where you can place these things. So this is a little cloud application that we utilize. We didn't write it, it's kind of a whiteboarding, but then it allows us to categorize this information. And then out of that information you can get a kind of an idea with kind of a traffic lighting system as to what's good and what's bad. Now actually, to use the ETMC, obviously you need to, the people who are utilizing the ETMC, which means everybody in the transformation domain, needs to understand what some of these words mean, like strategizing, roadmapping, initiating, so they get an understanding of what these phases are using our terminology. But that doesn't take too long. That only takes about an hour, maybe 2 hours tops. After that, you know, you can do a workshop and start getting people to throw stickies at the wall, as it were. Now I wanted to show you on the website, let's just minimize this. On the website, if you come down here where it says start with the ETMC, there's various little things you can do here, but if you click, or you click anywhere in there, it'll take you to the ETMC page. There are 2 presentations. This is a stock PowerPoint presentation which takes people through the definitions of the words, why we're doing this, why is it important, how we're going to do it, kind of an executive briefing almost. These are the speaker notes for that presentation. This was a presentation I did of that information to the BCS earlier this year, I think it was. You can download the ETMC, which is a PDF file, so it's quite high resolution, so you can print very large printouts if you wanted to do. So as with all of our things, we try and provide things so that people can do this stuff on their own. They don't need to pay us as a consultancy, because one of our goals is to reduce the reliance of end user companies on consultancies. You can read an introduction about it. It's a PDF. Again, this is kind of an executive briefing paper. It's in 4 pages, as you can see from here. And when printed on an A3 sheet of paper, it kind of makes a little, you know, a 4-page A4 document, which just explains, you know, what the context is, why is this important, what are we going to do about it, and perhaps maybe you want to engage us to do this, maybe not, up to you really. You can book a telecom and you can book a workshop for us to talk to you about it. As I said, down here are the speaker notes. Here you can download an example report, and so from that all of the stickies that people put on the wall or on the in the app, we can generate a report, and this is an example report that was generated for actually that company that you had seen. So this was the canvas that you saw in the slides. So this is real information. It's been desensitized, of course. So in this document there's a management summary. what are the results, what are the key findings, what are the recommendations. Then we go into the detailed results, which is where we look over here at the actual canvas. What does it look like? Because visually that tells a story on its own. Then for each of these stickies we pull them out here into tables so we can actually read what people have said. And then at the back there's some definitions, just so people still know what these, the words we're using are. So the detailed results, so for example these are all the actual comments that people put in, and they've been divided into, is it a cultural aspect, or is it something to do with culture, or is it something to do with the methods? So what you find in a lot, which is why we always say culture is king, you'll find probably a lot of culturally bad things. And people say culture is difficult to change. It actually isn't so much. Some culture is, because it just is. It's depending on the seniority of people and what they really want to do and all that kind of stuff. But actually, changing how people do their job and the tools they use and things like this does take some time. Culturally, you can start hitting some of these, and that's going to start having an impact straight away. So that's a report you can see. Obviously there's a book, you can buy a hard copy, but you can read the book online, because all of our books, if you click on that, are on issue. So the book that goes through all of that information also is online, which you can go and view and read full screen like all the rest of our books. If you go and look at Pragmatic EA when you're on issue, you will see all of the books that you can go and read if you want to. There was one thing I wanted to say. Yeah, so we're getting into the detail here, but fundamentally the main thing here is that this is I think it's a very holistic, coherent way of saying to an organization, your transformation domain is important. Don't think of business and IT, think of operations and transformation. Operations depends on transformation. If transformation is bad, operations is going to suffer, which means your company is going to suffer. So looking at the transformation domain, are we good? Are we bad? I don't know. Let's have a look. How can we have a look? Well, let's ask the people working in the transformation domain what they think, because they'll be the guys that generally know, because they'll be the ones that have to solve and work with all the problems. So all Poet is doing here is providing a canvas, an environment where you can do that. Otherwise you'll just ask questions, you get random answers, you won't know what to do with the information particularly. This allows you to gather that information in a structured way and then make sense of it. So that's really all I wanted to talk about today on half an hour, 40 minutes. So really now the rest of this is up to questions that people want to ask. Let me just bring up the questions. Has anybody asked any questions? I don't know. Let's find out. No, there are no questions at the moment. I was interested to see how this would go actually, because I was doing them at 8 o'clock at night to try and get more people from around the world involved. But let's just put something up while we're here, otherwise we're staring at a blank screen, which is probably not a good idea. But I see there are only 2 people, or 3 people including me. So Pete, you are one of them. I don't know who the other person is, but there are 3 people including me. So I suspect the other person might well be in Australia as well, because 8 o'clock at night is okay for people in in America and west of me, but obviously not very good for people to the east. So Peter, have you got any questions? And the other person who's not said anything yet, have you got any questions? I'll give you a few minutes. If not, I'll end the call and go and have a cup of coffee. I'll just put this up. That's the wrong thing. That's what I wanted to do. I'll just put this up so you can ask questions about anything, but these are the things that we've looked at today. Okay, if you do have some questions, ask them. Otherwise, I'll sort of start finishing up. Thank you for attending. If you do have any questions or suggestions, criticisms, anomalies that you've seen, or anything, I'm always happy to hear things. That's one of the reasons Poet and PEAF has grown, because if something's wrong, I want to change it. I'm not going to just keep banging the table going, no, I've decided that's right, so I'm going to ignore everybody. So please, let me know. You can always get me at kevin@pragmaticea.com. So there are no more questions, or there are no questions today. Just for you guys who are on the call, the other calls that maybe you didn't attend because they're in the wrong time zone, we had about 20 or 30 people on those calls, and there were quite a few questions. But as I'm sure you know, if you missed them, you can watch those on YouTube, as you can re-watch this one also. So with that, as there are no questions, I'll let you all go and have a nice